Today we're going to learn about Ritucarya, also known as our seasonal regimen. As we learned in week 3 of the Tridosha theory and the dosha kala, we understand that the doshas, not only do they affect the time of day, but they also affect the time of year. Based off of where you're living, some people are subject to 6 seasons, whereas here in the Northern Hemisphere, we are subject to 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. There are some Ayurvedic recommendations for eating in the winter months. Vata starts to build up over the winter months, and so it is recommended that in the winter we focus more on eating sweet, sour, salty tasting foods that are heavily cooked and trying to avoid eating raw, light foods. So we want to make sure that in the winter months, we are drinking warm beverages or hot potency foods. We don't want to be drinking ice water in the middle of winter because that's like pouring water on a fire. And our fire is already a little bit lower in the winter months. So we want to make sure that we are keeping that fire going by increasing the heat. So ask your server to leave the ice out of your drink at the restaurant, or try to drink beverages at room temperature if possible. But ideally we want to drink hot. So if you're going to have water, it's recommended in the winter months to have hot water. We want to maintain mild exercise throughout the winter months. We can exercise a little bit more mild, but we want to exercise more often during the colder months. Instead of doing something like HIIT training, practice more yoga. Contrary to popular belief, in the winter months, we're actually recommended in Ayurveda to go outside more frequently, to get as much sunlight as possible. Because our days are shorter in the winter months, we're prone to vitamin D deficiencies, so it's recommended to go outside a little bit more frequently. So if you have a desk job, make sure you're taking a break, going outside, getting some fresh air, getting some sunlight to replenish that loss of vitamin D. We want to focus on eating more heavy and dense foods. This is typical of casseroles or soups or things that have been cooked throughout the day, like crock pot meals. Those are recommended in the winter months. We want to try to minimize having too much bitter, pungent, and astringent tasting foods. And here's a fun one. The husbands will always love this one. Engage in more sexual activity during the winter months. Next, we'll move into the spring months. Spring is when Kapha dosha becomes aggravated. It's recommended to start lightening up on the sweet, sour, and salty tasting foods and start to focus our taste more on bitter, pungent, and astringent foods. We're going to start to make our shift from heavy, dense, oily, cooked foods from the winter months. As we move into the spring months, we want to start lightening up what we're eating. So switching to things like salads or sandwiches and eating more raw vegetables is recommended during the Kapha aggravated season of spring. So some changes that we can make here would be to steam our vegetables instead of cook them in a casserole or fry them on a pan. Make sure you're adding more seasoning in the spring months, things like cumin and cardamom and coriander, fennel, things of this nature are going to help stimulate Agni in the digestive fire. One thing that's recommended in both the winter and the spring months is using sesame oil in your food or as a moisturizer for your skin. Sesame oil is known to be heating and is beneficial for both Vata and Kapha. It is recommended in the spring months to significantly increase our water intake. This is so that we flush as much Kapha dosha out of the body as possible. One thing to understand about the spring is that Kapha dosha has been building up in the body all winter long. Because of the colder months, Kapha dosha has been building up in a solid state. So as the planet moves into spring and our planet starts to warm up, Kapha dosha begins to melt and liquefy. Kapha dosha is in charge of mucus production. So typically what happens in the spring is all that mucus that has been formed in the body in a solid state over the winter months starts to liquefy, and our body starts to try to get rid of that extra mucus. That being said, we want to eat things that are going to be for that particular dosha in the spring months. The springtime is when it's recommended to start consuming more fermented foods. Things like kimchi or sauerkraut are recommended. Yogurt is also considered a fermented food. However, yogurt and most dairy products will actually aggravate Kapha dosha. So make sure you're eating those things in moderation, especially if you're dealing with excessive mucus. The spring months are when vigorous exercise is recommended. We want to shake off all that old winter weather and come out into the new springtime with a fresh new leaf. You'll see a lot of it in the fitness industry. You'll notice the gyms will start to fill up after the first of the year. Everybody's trying to get back into shape before the summer months in bikini bodies. The reason being, we want to get rid of all the excess of kapha that's built up over the winter months. So we're going to focus on things like interval training, more cardio, or something like hot yoga or power yoga flow, something that's really intense and getting us very sweaty. Try to avoid taking naps in the springtime months, especially after meals. Intercourse is also recommended in the springtime months, as it could be considered vigorous exercise. So moving into the summer months, this is when pitta starts to build up in the body. Temperatures outside are the hottest all year. So it's recommended to try to significantly decrease salt, sour, and pungent foods during the summer months. And try to focus on sweet, bitter, and astringent tasting foods during the summer and the fall. If you're going to consume alcohol, it is recommended to have beer instead during the summer months. Beer is considered bitter and has a cooling effect. Pitta really likes fresh fruit, so it's recommended to go nuts on fruit during the summer months. If you're going to have something like juice, it's recommended that you make your own juice from scratch. Using fresh fruit, it's very simple. Going to the store, taking any peel or rind off and throwing it in the blender and make yourself a smoothie. If you don't like the pulp, you can let the smoothie sit for a little while and the juice will naturally separate, and you can strain the pulp off the top and drink the juice from the bottom. We're going to eat plenty of sweet and light foods during the summer months. So again, we can focus more on eating salads or having things that are baked or steamed versus fried. Try to get your direct sunlight exposure just in the morning on the summer months. Try not to use too many oils when cooking, and consider switching to coconut oil during the summer and fall months. In Ayurveda, coconut oil is known as cooling for the post-metabolic effect. So anytime we're having pitta-related issues, coconut oil is recommended. In the summer months, we actually want to avoid heavy exercise because the body becomes easily dehydrated in the summer. It is recommended to take lots of naps during the summer months. Wear light and loose outfits, and don't be afraid to take a cold shower. Next, we'll focus more on the fall. The fall is when pitta begins to aggravate. It has been building up all summer long, and as the planet starts to cool, pitta-related conditions tend to creep up on us in the fall months. So we're going to focus again still on those sweet, bitter, and astringent tastes. So eating things like more wheat and dairy is recommended in the fall. So we want to minimize sour and salty tastes during the fall months, as these will aggravate pitta dosha even more. And maintain mild exercise throughout the rest of the season until we get into the winter months. This is our last ditch effort to get as much sun exposure as possible. When fall season begins, typically this is when pitta-related inflammation and infection is at its highest. This is when we see back to school months and flu season. This is typically when we see an uptick in viruses. Our digestive fire is starting to dwindle and it's weakening our immune system. Engage in as much sexual activity as you'd like during the fall. This is just an overall guide of where we can change our lifestyle and eating habits based off of the season, but making sure that we're also focusing on Vikriti and Prakriti when we're making food choices. That's all for today. I'll see you in the next video.